All right. Today we are diving into one of the most influential and, yeah, controversial political pamphlets ever written, Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. Seriously, this was a book that completely stunned his friends, made him a ton of new enemies, and ended up creating the foundation for a whole new political philosophy.
So let's just get right into the central mystery here, the puzzle of the man himself. I mean, how could a guy who championed the American Revolution then turn around and just viciously condemn the French one, right? It looked like the same kind of fight for freedom, just across the channel. It's a paradox that has had people scratching their heads for more than 2 centuries. Yeah, to really get why this was such a bombshell, you have to understand who Burke was. This guy was no stick-in-the-mud tyrant. He was a leading Whig politician, which basically made him a liberal for his time. He was all for American independence. He fought hard against the persecution of Catholics back in his native Ireland. He even went after a powerful colonial governor for corruption. So when this guy, turns around and calls the French revolutionaries a swinish multitude, well, that wasn't just an attack. It felt like a total betrayal. And that moment, right there, is what cemented his legacy as the father of modern conservatism. Okay, section 1. So let's really set the stage for just how shocking Burke's turn was. So this whole thing actually started as just a private letter to some young French aristocrat, but it quickly turned into an absolute public sensation. The book just exploded onto the scene. We're talking 13,000 copies sold in the first 5 weeks. That's an incredible number for back then. This wasn't some dry, dusty book for academics, no. It was a political firebomb. Absolutely everyone was reading it, and everyone was arguing about it. And when Burke says the revolution was astonishing, he did not mean that in a good way. Not at all. You have to remember, a lot of people in England were cheering this on. They saw it as a new dawn for liberty in France. But Burke, he saw something completely different. He called it a strange chaos, a mix of silliness and brutality that just horrified him. For him, this wasn't some noble step towards freedom. No, it was a dangerous, reckless leap straight into anarchy. All right, section 2. So what was his actual case against the revolution? I mean, why did he reject something that so many others saw as this noble fight for freedom? Okay, so Burke's whole argument really boils down to this. You can't just tear a society down to its foundations and try to rebuild it from scratch based on some abstract blueprint like the rights of man. He saw society as more like a complex, living thing, an organism that needed slow, careful, gradual reform, not a violent revolution. He put his faith in things you could actually touch and feel: tradition, private property, and rights that were inherited over generations. Those were concrete. These new abstract rights, he thought they were incredibly dangerous. Why? Because they could be twisted to mean anything, and, in the end, used to justify absolute tyranny. And this idea is captured just perfectly in one of his most famous quotes. See, for Burke, society isn't some simple business deal, a partnership that you can just tear up whenever you feel like it. No way. He saw it as this sacred trust, a partnership that connects everyone, the people who are alive right now, the people who came before us, and the generations that are yet to be born. So to just rip that up, that's not just radical, it's a betrayal of your ancestors and your children. Now, this is really interesting. Burke takes a word that we see as totally negative today, prejudice, and he flips it on its head. He's not defending bigotry or anything like that, not at all. For him, prejudice meant the collected wisdom of generations. It's like the instincts and common sense that get passed down. He called it the general bank and capital of nations. And he believed that this collective wisdom was a much safer guide than the brilliant ideas of any one person, no matter how smart they were. Okay, section 3. And here's where it gets kinda spooky. Burke's arguments weren't just abstract philosophy. He made a prediction, a chillingly accurate one, about where this was all headed. I mean, his foresight here is just remarkable. Think about this. In 1790, way before the bloodbath of the Reign of Terror even began, Burke predicted that all this chaos would end with a military dictatorship. He wrote that some popular general would eventually rise up and become the master of your whole republic. And what happened? Well, first came the Reign of Terror, which already seemed to prove his point. And then, just a couple of years after Burke died, a popular general named Napoleon Bonaparte did exactly what Burke had predicted. He staged a coup and took total control. All right, moving on to section 4. So how did people react to this bombshell of a book?
And what kind of legacy did it leave behind?
Well, the reaction was immediate, and it was fierce. His own political party, the Whigs, literally split right down the middle because of this book. His critics went after him hard. They said he was losing his mind. Some even spread rumors that he was a secret Catholic who was just offended by the revolution's anti-church stance. And you had some real intellectual heavyweights of the time, people like Mary Wollstonecraft and even his old friend Thomas Paine, who immediately fired back with their own books defending the revolution. But then a funny thing happened. As Burke's dark prophecies about terror and a military takeover started coming true, his book's reputation began to grow. It eventually became the foundational text, the cornerstone of modern conservatism. I mean, its influence stretched on for centuries, inspiring everyone from 19th century historians to 20th century economists like Friedrich Hayek. Christopher Hitchens summed it up perfectly when he called it the first serious argument that revolutions devour their own children.
But we have to add a really important piece of nuance here. Historians, including conservatives like Alfred Cobbin, have pointed out a pretty major flaw. As a piece of political theory, as literature, the book is a masterpiece, magnificent. But as a guide to what was actually happening in France at the time, not so much. Burke was, frankly, pretty poorly informed about the real causes of the revolution. So while his big ideas were powerful, his actual historical analysis was, you could say, misleading.
But Burke's story doesn't end in the past. Believe it or not, the power and the controversy of this book stretches all the way into our own time. Just get your head around this for a second. The year is 2020. More than 230 years after this book was written, it was considered so dangerous that the Chinese Communist Party banned it. That just goes to show you that Burke's central critique, his warning against radical revolutions that want to tear everything down based on abstract ideas, is still seen as a major threat by some of the most powerful governments on the planet today. So if a book written way back in 1790 can still be seen as a threat today, what does that tell you about the power of its ideas? It tells us that this debate that Burke kicked off is, well, it's far from over. That central conflict between tradition and revolution, between the inherited wisdom of the past and the radical reason of the present, that's a tension that still shapes our world. And it leaves us with the same fundamental question. Do we reform what we have, or do we tear it all down and start again?